Sis, let me tell you about the time I stayed in a relationship that was draining the life out of me. And the crazy part is, it wasn't even the type of situation you could point to and say, yep, that's toxic. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, sneaky, and confusing. The kind of unhealthy that makes you question your own sanity before you ever question the other person's behavior. And that's exactly why I'm telling you this. Because if you've ever felt uneasy or confused or emotionally tired around someone you care about, you're going to hear yourself all over this story. When I first met him, he did everything right. He wasn't doing anything special, just basic consistency, basic check-ins, basic affection. But because I had been through some things, I took that little sprinkle of effort and convinced myself it was a whole buffet. It felt good at first. It felt like maybe I finally found someone who wasn't going to come into my life just to waste my time. And that little bit of comfort was enough for me to relax my guard. That's where the problem started. See, unhealthy relationships rarely announce themselves. They don't show up waving a red flag yelling, "Run!" They ease in quietly. They act normal. They act harmless. They act like they're good for you. And then, the shift happens so slowly, you don't notice the decline until you're already halfway drained. With him, it started with small things. Little patterns I brushed off, little behaviors I excused because I didn't want to make a big deal out of nothing. At least, that's what I told myself. He started canceling plans last minute, not because something major happened, but because he was tired or he fell asleep. And instead of seeing it as inconsiderate, I tried to be understanding. I'd tell myself he worked hard. I'd tell myself he was overwhelmed. I'd tell myself I didn't want to be dramatic. But every time he canceled, I felt that little sting of disappointment. You know that feeling you get when you know you deserve better, but you don't want to start another argument or look like the difficult one? That was me. I was shrinking my reactions so he wouldn't shrink his interest. And the saddest part? I didn't even realize I was doing it. I was so busy trying to hold the relationship together that I didn't recognize how much of myself I was letting go of in the process. I started adjusting to his inconsistencies. I started being the easygoing one. I started being the one who never asked for too much, who didn't press issues, who kept the peace even when the peace wasn't real. That's the beginning of how unhealthy relationships pull you in. They make you the flexible one, while the other person gets comfortable being inconsistent. And while I was playing cool, my body was telling the truth. When he texted me good morning, I didn't feel excitement anymore. I felt tension. That's not normal, but I ignored it. When he called me, I'd start overthinking what mood he was in before I even picked up. That's not healthy, but I normalized it. When I vented or opened up, he'd shut down or make me feel like I was doing too much. And instead of seeing that as a compatibility issue, I trained myself to talk less, feel less, and expect less. And sis, let me tell you something. Any relationship that requires you to emotionally diet just to keep it functioning, that's not love. That's survival mode. This was the stage where everything looked fine on the outside, but emotionally, I was slipping. I didn't feel confident. I didn't feel chosen. I didn't feel valued. I felt like I was trying to earn the kind of affection that should have been given freely. And instead of walking away, I kept investing. I kept hoping he would go back to the version of himself I met in the beginning. But that version was the audition. The real him came later. After a while, the vibe between us just changed. And the crazy part, is that I couldn't even point to an exact day or moment when it flipped. It was just little things stacking up quietly until one day I realized I wasn't getting the same man I met in the beginning. He wasn't as attentive. He wasn't as present. He wasn't as intentional. Conversations felt shorter, like he was mentally somewhere else. Plans started depending on his mood, and anytime I tried to bring it up, he had an excuse that made me feel like I was being dramatic. It wasn't anything big enough for people on the outside to say, "Girl, leave him." But it was enough for me to feel this slow emotional erosion happening inside of me. And because the relationship didn't look obviously toxic, I kept telling myself I was overreacting. I remember catching myself repeating the same sentence to my friends whenever they asked how things were going. I'd say, "He's just going through a lot right now." I didn't even realize how many times I was using that line to cover up the fact that I was the only one putting in emotional energy. He had stuff going on every week. He was tired. He was stressed. He was overwhelmed. Meanwhile, I was dealing with my own life too, but I didn't get the luxury of checking out or disappearing. I still showed up. I still cared. I still tried to hold the connection together. And the more I tried to hold it together, the more he leaned back and let me do all the work. That's when it hit me. When a relationship starts feeling like you're the engine, the wheels, and the gas all by yourself, that's not partnership. That's emotional labor disguised as loyalty. I didn't want to admit it at the time, but I was starting to feel resentful. Not angry, resentful. Like I was carrying the weight of two people's emotional responsibility while he floated along doing the bare minimum to keep access to me. And the stupid part is, he probably didn't even know I felt that way. I was so busy trying not to nag him that I never actually told the truth about how heavy everything felt. The more I suppressed my feelings, the more distant he became. He could feel me pulling back, but instead of asking what was wrong, he just adjusted to the new dynamic like it didn't matter. And that's when I realized something important. Healthy men don't stay comfortable when they feel their woman slipping away emotionally. They lean in. They get curious. They make effort. Men who don't really care, they just go with it. They match your distance like it's nothing. And that was exactly what he was doing. I tried to tell myself it was a phase. I tried to hold on to the good moments we had in the beginning. I even went through screenshots like I was building a case for why we could still work, looking for any sign of who he used to be. But if you're honest, you know this too. When you start digging through old messages, trying to remind yourself why you liked somebody, the relationship has already shifted. You're not in the present. You're trying to resurrect something that isn't there anymore. The worst part was how normalized the disappointment became. I stopped expecting him to follow through. I stopped expecting him to show up consistently. I stopped expecting depth in conversations. I just started adjusting downward, like lowering the bar would somehow fix the fact that he wasn't meeting it. That's the part that messed me up the most. Not what he did, but what I tolerated. What I excused, what I allowed myself to believe so I wouldn't have to face the truth, that the connection I romanticized in my head wasn't real anymore. By this point, I wasn't even sad. I was tired. And being tired in a relationship is way worse than being hurt. Hurt means you still care. Tired means you've been dealing with the same emotional pattern for so long, you don't even have the energy to react anymore. And once you hit that point, the relationship is already sitting on borrowed time. The real problem wasn't him pulling back. It was what his inconsistency started turning me into. That's when I really started noticing the relationship was unhealthy. I found myself doing emotional math every time we talked, analyzing his tone, trying to read his energy, trying to figure out whether I should bring something up or just keep quiet. I wasn't relaxed around him anymore. I wasn't comfortable. I was cautious. And when you have to be cautious in a relationship that's supposed to be intimate, that's your first sign that something isn't right. I didn't feel supported. I didn't feel heard. I felt like I was constantly adjusting myself so he wouldn't get annoyed or shut down. It got to the point where I started rehearsing conversations in my head before having them with him. Not because I was trying to communicate better, but because I was trying not to set him off, even though he wasn't doing anything dramatic. It was always this vibe like he was half engaged, half bothered, half present. And instead of questioning why his energy was so inconsistent, I questioned myself. That's what unhealthy relationships do. They make you critique yourself more than the person actually causing the issue. I stopped expressing my needs because every time I did, it felt like I was asking him for a favor instead of requesting something basic. If I voiced how I felt, he'd act confused or irritated, and suddenly I'd be apologizing for wanting clarity. I realized I was doing all the emotional heavy lifting, checking in, initiating conversations, trying to create connection, while he just reacted to whatever I did. And even his reactions were getting smaller and smaller. I knew things were bad when silence with him stopped feeling peaceful and started feeling like punishment. The energy in the room felt heavy. Talking felt like walking through mud. And every time I tried to pretend things were fine, I felt myself slipping deeper into that quiet, drained version of myself that didn't feel like me at all. Looking back, that was the beginning of the emotional burnout. Not heartbreak, burnout. The kind of exhaustion you feel when you've been carrying a relationship that isn't carrying you back. The moment everything really clicked for me wasn't some dramatic fight or big argument. It was literally us sitting in his car. We weren't talking about anything deep. Honestly, we weren't talking at all. He was on his phone scrolling, barely engaged, and I was just sitting there looking out the window. And out of nowhere, I had this moment of awareness where I realized I didn't feel comfortable being myself around him anymore. Not physically unsafe, but emotionally unsafe. I felt like I had to monitor every word, every tone, every reaction, just to keep things smooth between us. As I sat there, it hit me how much of myself I had slowly shut down just to avoid conflict or awkwardness. I wasn't laughing the same way. I wasn't joking like I used to. I wasn't as open. I wasn't as expressive. And it wasn't because I didn't want to be. It was because something in me had learned that being fully myself around him wasn't welcome. I felt like I had to shrink to keep the peace, and that realization sat in my chest like a weight. And then I had this quiet thought that changed everything. Why am I sitting next to somebody who makes me feel like I'm too much for them when they're not even giving me half of what I need? That thought right there cracked the whole illusion open. Because if you can't relax, if you can't be honest, if you can't talk without rehearsing, if you can't express yourself without walking on eggshells, then that's not a relationship. That's emotional tiptoeing. Sitting in that car, I realized I was lonelier with him than I was when I was actually single. And once you hit that point, that moment when you realize you feel alone even while sitting next to the person you're dating, there's no coming back from that. That's the kind of clarity you can't unsee. And even though I didn't say anything out loud that day, something in me broke away from the relationship right there in that passenger seat. I didn't fully leave yet, but mentally, emotionally, I started packing. The actual breakup didn't happen with fireworks or screaming or some dramatic "we're done." That's the funny part. When you've been drained for so long, the end doesn't blow up. It fades out. It's quiet. It's almost anticlimactic, like your spirit left the relationship weeks before your mouth finally said the words. A few days after that car moment, we were on the phone. And by on the phone, I mean I was talking and he was half listening, responding with those lazy little "yeah, I hear you" comments that don't actually mean anything. I was trying, again, to explain how I felt. Not in a dramatic way, not demanding anything wild, just being honest about feeling disconnected and unsupported. And instead of meeting me with effort or clarity, he hit me with, "You're overthinking. You always make things deeper than they are." That sentence right there felt like someone flipped a switch inside me. Not because it was the worst thing he ever said, but because it was the most honest representation of how he saw me, as someone whose feelings were an inconvenience, something to dismiss, something to smooth over instead of understand. But here's where the story shifts. Instead of arguing, instead of defending myself, instead of crying or trying to fix it, I just went calm. That deep, grown woman calm where you realize you're done repeating yourself to someone who's not listening. I remember saying, "You know what? You're right. I do make things deeper because I actually care. And that's exactly why this isn't working." He tried to backpedal, asking if I was really going to end things over one conversation. And I told him straight, no, I'm ending things because I kept lowering my standards to match a version of love that wasn't even making me happy. Once I said it, I felt this weird wave of peace. Not relief, more like I finally told the truth I'd been avoiding. I wasn't losing him. He was already halfway gone. I was losing the version of myself that kept settling for less than what I needed. And honestly, that version needed to go. After it ended, I had to sit with myself. And honestly, that part hit harder than the breakup. Not because I missed him. I didn't. What I missed was the version of me I used to be before the relationship drained me. And that's when the real lessons started showing up. I realized how easy it is for a relationship to become unhealthy, even when nobody's doing anything outrageous. It doesn't take cheating or cussing or big blow-ups. Sometimes all it takes is one person doing the bare minimum and the other person bending themselves in half trying to make it work. I learned that when you keep lowering your expectations to avoid conflict, you're not keeping the peace. You're just silencing yourself. And the silence builds up. It builds resentment. It builds confusion. It builds self-doubt. Before you know it, you're questioning your own feelings instead of questioning the person who's causing them. And that's exactly how women lose themselves. Not all at once, but little by little. By shrinking parts of themselves to keep a relationship that isn't even feeding them. Another thing I learned is that emotional safety is non-negotiable. If you can't be fully yourself around someone, what's the point? You shouldn't need a script just to communicate. You shouldn't have to water yourself down so someone else can feel comfortable. The right person won't make you feel like you have to manage their emotions before you can share your own. That's not partnership. That's parenting. And here's the lesson that really stuck. Your spirit will always tell you the truth long before your mind accepts it. You feel the shift before you understand it. You sense the distance before you acknowledge it. Your body reacts before your logic catches up. And when a relationship is unhealthy, your whole being starts whispering, "This doesn't feel right." The problem is, we're so used to surviving that we don't listen. But the truth is, your discomfort is the truth. Your sadness is the truth. Your tiredness is the truth. Your intuition is the truth. The relationship was just the distraction. Once I understood that, everything got clearer. Leaving wasn't about giving up on him. It was about finally choosing me. All right, sis. If this story hit a little too close, don't brush that off. That's your own experience tapping you on the shoulder. And I'm not here to tell you what decision to make. I'm just saying, pay attention to what you feel. Not what he says, not what he promises, not what you hope it turns into. Pay attention to your body and your spirit. They don't lie. You don't need a dramatic breakup to justify leaving something that's draining you. You don't need someone to cheat, scream, or embarrass you publicly for you to say, yeah, this isn't good for me. Sometimes, the biggest sign is just the fact that you don't feel like yourself anymore, and that's enough. And please stop gaslighting yourself thinking you're too emotional or asking for too much. You're not. You were just dealing with somebody who wasn't capable of loving you on the level you needed. That's not a personal failure. That's misalignment. And misalignment is meant to end. If this sat heavy on your chest, take a minute today and be honest with yourself about where you are and what you're feeling. Journal it. Pray about it. Cry if you need to. But don't keep pretending you're okay when you know you're not. And when you're ready to actually start enforcing boundaries, not the Instagram cute kind, but the real life, I'm done betraying myself kind, download the Bougie with Boundaries guide. The link is in the description. I created it for this exact version of you, the version that's tired of settling and finally ready to choose herself. You're not hard to love. You're not asking for the impossible. You just forgot who you were for a minute. But trust me, once you get back to yourself, you're going to wonder why you ever let anyone make you feel like too much or not enough. You deserve better. And deep down, you already know that. Girl, if you saw yourself in this story even a little bit, go download the Bougie with Boundaries guide. Don't sit here watching me unpack my mess while you're still dealing with yours. Get the tools, get the receipts, get your boundaries together so you're not stuck entertaining men who don't even deserve access to you. The link is in the description. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment if this is exactly the type of content you need.